Hello and welcome to my UAV research series here at the Aerospace Village. I'm Matthew Gaffney, also known as Cyber Gaffers, and this is episode 1. So you will likely have known about or seen my previous presentations or papers on electronic flight bags or the aircraft information systems domain in the enabled aircraft. So why am I looking into a new subject? Well, thanks to COVID, all my work in aviation has stopped. And as a contractor, you know that you're the first to go when there are issues or changes. And the global crisis that aviation is experiencing right now has sadly seen a lot of my friends lose their jobs. So after several months, I found some new work, but not in aviation. And while it is challenging and rewarding, I'm no longer working on aircraft or systems you would find in the AISD. One day I hope to find myself back in that space, but it's not likely to happen until airlines are firmly back on their feet. So to keep one foot in the industry and to diversify my aerospace knowledge, I decided to look into drones. Now, I've had fleeting glimpses into this industry. The UK seems to be a hotbed of innovation in this area, and I am noticing some similarities in the approach to security for UAVs, commercial UAVs, that we have seen before in the earlier days of aviation space, ICS and IoT. The focus seems to be on developing a solution that works rather than one which works securely. And this may seem natural to an industry where the company that gets there first is the one that gets noticed. This leads to more investment and more business opportunities. But we all know that to retrospectively alter a product security posture is more expensive than baking it in at conception. It also takes more time, and the resulting security can be less effective. So naturally, what I've seen has piqued my interest, and I want to know what's going on. Besides, UAVs are fun. I can't wait. I mean, what can be better for a big kid like me than making a big aeroplane and flying it around? I mean, this is going to be cool. So this time, I'm not an insider like I was with the aviation work. I do not have access to commercial products and documentation. So this is going to be interesting. Now, I must be absolutely clear what this series is and is not. I do not offer you expertise in this subject, just my natural curiosity and a willingness to learn. I have never even owned a drone before, let alone know how to fly them. Nada, zilch. This is my first steps into an unknown world where I will be learning along the way, and I want you to join in. I may look into a subtopic and either miss something that you probably know much better than me. And in that case, get in touch. I want to hear from you. This is your journey as much as it is mine. If you want to get a UAV and join in and follow along, then you are more than welcome to join me. And I'd like to get your feedbacks and updates as well. One thing I will say is that here at the Aerospace Village, we believe in responsible behavior around research and security. Any issues we do discover will be handled in a responsible manner. And in the infamous words of our founder, Pete, we bring light, not heat, to the subject. Also, there are rules about operating UAVs, even for recreation. So if you join in, you must understand the rules where you live and the regulations and abide by them. And I ask you to do that, please. We do not want lots of illegal drone activity going on. And in a later episode, I'm going to cover regulations here in the UK, the US, and maybe France and Germany or some other places around the world. So now that we're clear on that, let's find out more about drones. So UAVs, or unmanned aerial vehicles, are essentially a very inexpensive airframe controlled by a rather basic computer. Commercial or even private aircraft are very expensive. A Cessna 172 appears super cheap next to a Boeing 737. And while commercial UAVs can run into the thousands, they are another level of cheapness next to the Cessna or a larger aircraft. UAVs are also fairly new and pretty young. Although model aircraft have been around for a while, the commercial side of them is very, very new, and it's still developing, and it's a very fledgling industry, and the regulation's still trying to keep up. That said, the availability of parts makes them very cheap to build and maintain. The components are often a mix of IoT and commercial off-the-shelf hardware, and as well as for recreational purposes, drones are used for two main purposes commercially, and that's gathering of data and the delivery of small items. So for data gathering, UAVs are often fitted with low-cost sensors to collect imagery, air samples, or other data for commercial or research organizations. For example, a farmer may wish to know which parts of their fields need more water or nitrogen. Oil and gas companies could use them to identify leaks in underwater wells, or perform regulatory checks to ensure there is no pollution occurring. Or universities may just want to conduct research in a cost-effective manner. And it goes without saying that the value is not in the UAV, but in the data. Even if the cameras and sensors that the UAVs carry cost thousands, the value is the data. Another typical usage is delivery of small packages, either as part of a just-in-time logistics solution for small, high-cost components, or for remote areas that are not easily served by traditional delivery services. If you have to get a small package from A to B faster than ground delivery, this could be a very cost-effective solution. Helicopters with a crew costs hundreds of pounds or dollars per hour, and a UAV would cost much less. And typical applications that I've seen trialed or suggested include getting medical samples or supplies to or from remote islands or even naval vessels, and transporting either medical supplies to them or getting medical samples from them to a laboratory within minutes, as opposed to hours or days that it would have taken otherwise. I've also seen, for example, getting a car part delivered to the Isles of Scilly here in the UK, which could allow a family to get moving and get their broken down car going in hours rather than being stranded for days waiting for that part to come in by a boat. And also, don't forget that whilst flying is very safe, it doesn't come without risk. By reducing the number of manned flights between different points, you also put fewer lives at risk in the process, and you also save cost while doing it. So the potential future markets for UAVs are pretty huge. And this is why there's so much innovation and investment happening in this space. And just to go through a few examples here. So top left is a US company called Valancy Incorporated. They're based out of San Francisco. They're partnered with a pharma giant, Merck, and they have been looking at drones to deliver COVID-19 vaccines to health centers across the US, and maybe even elsewhere in the world. But this is obviously to help with the huge logistical challenge of 2021 in getting those vaccinations to wherever they're needed. The DHL drone, this is actually version 4 of their drone. And they've been investing a lot of research and development into these kinds of UAVs. And you see the first 3, these are they are VTOL fixed wings. So they're vertical takeoff or landing, which then transition into a fixed wing, which gives you greater range and flying time. But for the DHL one, this is really interesting. And they've been investing a lot of money and time into developing UAVs for automated package delivery from unmanned delivery pods. And the idea is that a customer loads their item into a specific box, they go to the pod, they put in the address, pay the fee, the pod then loads the box and maybe others, plus a fresh battery into a drone, which then automatically flies to the destination or the next delivery hub where the package is removed by machines and the drone is readied for the next task. And no humans are involved in all those delivery phases, apart from the customer taking the box to the pod. And it's really cool. And the potential is huge. They do have a lot of promotional videos about this, and they're really cool. Go check them out. Another interesting implementation is Skyports, another UK company. They are not just investing huge amounts in infrastructure for air taxis, and yes, that's a thing, and it is coming, but they are also getting into the drone delivery space. And this time it's for the NHS, moving drugs and clinical samples from A to B, much faster than they can be done by road. Now, this reduces the time testing takes in clinics in remote Scottish Islands, for example, and can really help to improve clinical outcomes. Now, you will notice that it looks a lot like the DHL drone, and the article I read about this said that these were German-built drones that can carry up to 6 kilos. And I'm wondering if DHL is selling their designs to Skyports, or if there is a third company that is selling their design to DHL and Skyports. I don't know yet, but as soon as I find out, I'll let you know. Finally, now bottom right, this is the most interesting example I have found, and it's a startup called Zipline. They're a San Francisco-based company, but they operate in East Africa. And they are already operating a service for medical supplies in Africa. They have taken what they have learned over there to start trials in California to also assist in the fight against COVID. And it's not very often you see technology and ideas developed in outside of California brought back into what is essentially a state which is known for technical innovation. So this is what makes it really stand out from the others. Zipline are already performing over 600 flights a day, serving up to 12 million people and 2,000 health facilities in Ghana, delivering vaccines, blood, and life-saving drugs. This is cool. So one thing you might not know about me is I served in the medical corps in the British Army for several years. And I think back to my time, both in Africa and the Middle East, and one of the biggest challenges was, or still is, snake bites. Now, these are very common in Africa, and access to antivenom in a short period of time is vital to a positive health outcome. The problem is that antivenom is very expensive, and it has a very short shelf life, as it can't be made synthetically. In actual fact, it comes from animals. All of these factors mean that keeping enough of the drugs available in a matrix that covers remote villages is not cost effective for them. And many of the poorer parts of the population suffer as a result. Now, back to Zipline, they operate distribution centers in key locations, which are part medical warehouse, part drone airport. And their UAVs have a return range of over 50 miles, which means they can make hundreds of deliveries every day, and each center can cover an area of nearly 9,000 square miles. Think about that, that's huge. Now, this enables healthcare to be delivered over a large area in a cost-effective and timely manner, and this is already improving patient outcomes over there. And interestingly, their drones are very different. So I said first that the first three examples are the VTOL fixed wings. Zipline operate a catapult to launch their drones. And they can either drop a package by parachute, as we can see in the photo here, or the whole drone is caught safely in a net. And this keeps the cost of the drone and the complexity of the drone down, certainly compared to VTOL fixed wings. So maybe now you get a feel for why this subject is so exciting. The opportunities and the potentials are endless. So there's some really cool solutions being developed for real world issues that could have a massive positive effect on the health of remote populations across the world. Imagine how things would have been different through the COVID pandemic if medical samples of all types, not just coronavirus tests, but say urine for diabetes and stool to check for indicators of bowel cancer and IBD, this would allow diagnostics to happen remotely of medical facilities. And this would have kept transmission rates down among our critical and quite frankly, amazing health workers. So the future possibilities for these and other commercial opportunities are probably only just starting to be explored, and we could probably see much more coming out of this industry in the future. And finally, I feel we should tip the hat to another UK company called Flylogics. Now, they're based about an hour away from where I live in New Hampshire in the UK, and they recently performed the first drone delivery flight between 2 commercial airports in the UK. And it was a trial conducted with the CAA to explore the feasibility of point-to-point deliveries using drones. And primarily the focus was for NHS support to the Isles of Scilly, which is a remote archipelago about 30 miles or so from Cornwall on the mainland. And however, the commercial potential has not been ignored either. And this is where the ideas for moving car parts was, but they were also talking about the possibility of delivering high-cost local delicacies to the mainland, to clients willing to pay a premium. And because of their hydrocarbon engine, they have an extremely long range compared to electric propulsion. And they're already performing services in the commercial aerospace up in the oil fields off of Scotland. And they're doing mapping and air quality surveys. And what they're doing is they're sampling the air around oil rigs just to see if there's any kind of leakage of gas or oil that they're not being able to see visually, such as what happened in the Gulf of Mexico with the BP one, that a lot of gas escaped around the rig, and that was the initial indicator. And air quality sensors would have picked that up sooner rather than what happened. So that's probably what they're looking at doing, and they're operating a space where there's probably more regulatory oversight now in checking for those kind of scenarios. But also their UAV is extremely interesting from a technological point, because they teamed up with Cambridge University to develop a lightweight two-way SATCOM solution for small drones that piggybacks on the Iridium network. Now, this allows their ground control stations to be pretty much anywhere, a bit like military drones, which operate all around the world, but for the US and British Air Force, they're actually controlled out of Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. So local technicians keep them maintained at air bases all around the world, and they may even perform the takeoff and landing maneuvers, but then hand the aircraft off to these pilots in Nevada, who are literally sat in ISO containers controlling these drones through SATCOM links, which is pretty cool. The biggest question I have about Flylogics drones is whether they also use conventional telematics as well as the SATCOM link. UAVs in the UK are subject to airworthiness approvals, pretty much like aircraft, and I think that would suggest that there is some kind of redundancy on these onboard systems. I don't know for sure, but we're going to look into that too. Now, down the pecking order in commercial solutions, you can go off the commercial off the shelf, and some businesses do. In fact, plenty of businesses do that. And this is one such solution from DJI. Now, you'll notice the short flight time and relatively low range, but drone regulations around the world, particularly in the UK anyway, and the States, they require and restrict even the most commercial operators to line of sight only, which means that you can't go further than a few hundred meters really. A kilometer is probably a bit too far, depending on local conditions. But these are often used for surveys in hard to reach places, such as pylons and challenging terrain. A lot of power outages and even some of the fires we saw in California over this year were caused by heat affecting the power lines, which then sagged and dropped into the dry vegetation underneath and set it alight. Or we had pylons which haven't been inspected for over 100 years, and which are in dire need of repair. So you've got two choices. You can either climb up and down a 300-foot pylon, which may take a fit guy half an hour before moving on to the next pylon, or you can grab a drone and you can get up to the necessary height in a few seconds, check out what you need to check, and then move on to the next one without landing. You could probably do yourself, maybe even 3 to half a dozen pylons on a full battery, which you just swap out and then carry on going. So while this price tag may seem high to you and I as an individual, for a commercial operation with staff overheads and obviously probably getting paid on a per pylon basis, this is a force multiplier and can turn out to be very cost effective. So let's look at the composition of a typical drone. So obviously they vary quite a bit, but the the principles are the same. So everything is kind of focused here around the flight controller and the processor, and a lot of these flight controllers are Linux based, but they will control a number of motors and servos, which move the flight surfaces, or they spin motors faster or slower to if it's a quadcopter, you'll have at least 4 motors, and they'll spin some faster rather than others to tilt it one way or the other. Whereas with a fixed wing, the servos will move flight surfaces very much like an aircraft, which will bank the aircraft or pitch it up or down, whilst other motors propel the aircraft through the air. And the flight controller will also, as well as the input from from a controller or a ground station, which is typically 2.4 gigahertz, they will also take inputs from sensors on board, such as a barometer, GPS, compass, a pitot tube, which is a very accurate way of measuring airspeed, and maybe even LiDAR as well. I've seen a lot of add-ons you can put onto your own drones to get accurate distance measurements to the ground. For example, you want to land or auto land a drone, accurate measurements of the distance from the ground allows you to basically put that drone down nice and softly, as opposed to maybe a klutz flyer like myself smashing it into the ground and maybe even causing damage. And interestingly, I talked earlier about redundancy. Well, a lot of these solutions allow you to have 2 or even 3 GPSs and compasses. Some even come with 3 compasses built in. So we're seeing a lot of characteristics from commercial aviation being built into the flight controllers for these smaller drones. Also, what's interesting is you'll have some kind of telematics. So that's basically sending data down to a ground control station, for example, or a data recorder, and that will record things like GPS location, bearing, altitude, wind speed, ground speed, whatever you want, really. It's basically sending that data back to a unit somewhere. And that's typically done through RF. And, a lot of the solutions I'm seeing are 433 or 915 megahertz, which obviously are license free up to a certain power level. And that's something we can certainly have a look at. Some use Wi-Fi, and they use direct Wi-Fi with directional antennas up to several kilometers away. So that's really interesting. Some are piggybacking on 4G or 5G networks. And then I've told you also about SATCOM as well. What you also might see as well is sometimes they will push out telematics to a FPV or first person view transmitter. with a camera. So what you can get is a view from the camera with the telematics on board, and it makes flying the drone a lot easier. It also looks really cool because you get the, the artificial horizon and the pitch measurement lines as well. Pretty much like you're in a fighter aircraft, really. And you can get some goggles as well, which receive this, and you can fly your drone around. If you do that, you do need a spotter as well, certainly by UK rules, but we'll go on to those later on. And then you've got the purpose of flying the drone around, your payload. And in this example, what I've put is a camera, for example. So interestingly, the commands for that camera will come from the flight controller, and that can also come from the ground system through the telematics into the flight controller, and then passed onto a camera module, which will control a gimbal board, which controls servos that points the camera in the right direction or moves it so it's operational and it's in the right place. And then the camera module will also tell the camera what to do, take a photo, video, whatever. So really interesting, but quite simple setup. It's certainly less complicated than what I'm used to with commercial aircraft, but it's there's a lot of interesting things here. So that telematics, like I said, is 433 or 915. Now it uses often uses the Maverick protocol, which is not always encrypted. So can we sniff the data coming back down to the ground station? Can we inject our own commands to change the waypoints that is pushed up to a drone? This is all things we're going to look at. Can we affect any of these? This year in the Aerospace Village at DEF CON, there was a talk about spoofing LiDAR. Let's have a look at that. Pitot tube, not sure if I can affect air pressure. So I'm not sure if I can affect these two. But GPS, we saw, a lot of good work being done by Harshad about, affecting GPS. So, these are things we can look at playing around with, obviously in a legal and safe manner. We might have to do some of these attacks either on the ground or in a theoretical sense, but we'll certainly have a look at what we can do. And then we have the ground control station, like I was saying before. Now, often it's just a controller, just like this. So I can control the flight surfaces, and I've got buttons and switches I can switch to say, right, going to autopilot or just going to level flight. I'm going to put the controller down for a minute, pick it back up, put it into a normal flight, and then fly it around again. But with this, I'm getting very little feedback. I've got no screen to see the FPV camera. I can probably get limited telematics on this small LCD screen down here, so not very much. And I certainly can't record anything. So very limited in what I can do with this. And what a lot of people do is they build a ground or buy a ground control station. And these will have one or multiple screens. They will have a computer with a keyboard and maybe even a joystick input, switches going in, and they will be able to communicate over the same means that the drone can receive, such as SATCOM, Wi-Fi, and the MAV links. And they will also be able to receive the video as well. So possibly, depending on how the drone is set up, if you're collecting data, how do you send that data to where it needs to go? Obviously, you need to take it somewhere to process it. So it might go straight from the drone to the cloud. Are your cloud credentials on the drone? And if so, are they protected? If they come down to the into the ground control station and then saved locally, or sent through onto the business, how is that protected? If it's coming down the MAV link or via Wi-Fi, how do you set up the security? So yeah, these are all things we're going to look at. These are all things we're going to play with, and we're going to see, what the threats are, what the risks are, and what drone operators should really be doing in terms of protecting their assets. So like I said, we've got the threats. So I was thinking about the threats, and the key thing is, like I said, the values in the data. So the two main data sets are obviously the data between the drone and the ground station. So there we've got, for example, we can jam the RF. And depending on how you have your drone set up, that could then result in a loss of control. It could then fly off until the battery runs out and it crashes, resulting in the destruction. And this could lead to reduced confidence in your drone solution, or it could even be a safety violation. Remember, you need approvals to fly aircraft in a commercial sense, even drones. So if you crash, that's obviously quite nasty, and it's going to get you some regulatory scrutiny from your local regulator. The RF, like I said, is it encrypted? You know, can we do any spoofing? Is there any authentication on that on those data packets that are going back and forth over RF? So could we take over the control? Could we steal the drone? You know, and again, if we take over the drone and crash it somewhere it shouldn't go, again we've got the same concerns as well. But then also, you know, say, like I said, these cameras and sensors on board the UAV. Okay, to a business, they're not super expensive compared to what you'd find on a commercial aircraft, but they're still pretty expensive. They're much more expensive than what you and I would normally spend on a camera, for example. You know, we might, if we're a keen hobbyist, we might spend, you know, $1,000 or two on a camera. Some of the cameras in these drone solutions are thousands of pounds. Like some of them are five figures. You know, you lose 2 or 3 drones, and there's, you know, the costs start mounting up. Could you eavesdrop that data? You know, could you steal the data? And an interesting one as well is, so FPV cameras, you know, they don't discriminate. They are high up, and they're looking down at whatever they're looking at, and that is being broadcast over typically, I think it was 5.8 gigahertz. But it's done in the clear. You know, it's done on channels, obviously, but there's no restriction as to who can tune into that channel. So if you are accidentally picking up somebody who does not want to be filmed, or you're invading their private space accidentally and transmitting that over an FPV, are you then in violation of privacy laws? And of course, here in Europe, those are very strict. So that's something else we need to consider. And then you've got the data that goes between the drone or the payload on the drone and the corporate system or the cloud. And there obviously, you know, that data could be stolen, or if it's not configured correctly, you could be sending your cloud keys over those communications. And if anyone is sniffing that data, they could then get the keys to the kingdom also almost and compromise your IT systems. And then, like I said, you know, other threats include the environmental inputs. So, you know, we could interfere or spoof LiDAR. Again, similar consequences that we've discussed before. And then, yes, I didn't mention it. Some instead of LiDAR, some drones actually use radar. They have very low cost radar units. And, you know, could we spoof or interfere with that? So some interesting ideas floating around my head. I'll try and find a better way to describe them. But you know, if you have a very high speed machine that could detect when a Doppler signal is being received, obviously the drone is going to wait for that signal to be reflected and sent back up. Well, you could, in theory, spoof the return wave sooner, making the drone think it's lower than it actually is. Now, whether that would lead to loss of control, probably not, because if it's kind of the reverse of what happened in Die Hard 2, so that you know, the drone thinks it's lower than it really is, not higher. If there's a way of doing that to make the drone think it is higher than it is, and this has happened by accident on drones, and I've seen them literally plant into the ground at about 25 or 30 degrees at high speed because of, such errors. And if we can maybe interfere with the LiDAR or the radar Doppler to play around with that, then yes, we could have an effect on the drone. So, the fun bit. Let's play. Enough laying out the groundwork. Let's go and get ourselves a drone. So, obviously, we can't just do this in a theoretical sense. We need some kind of hardware to play with. But I'm not going to buy any old drone because we need to think about what we're going to get. So I did a quick think around my requirements. So I decided that obviously I'm going to look at something that needs a long fly time, because if I've got a drone that can stay in the air 20 minutes, for example, that might not be long enough to do some of my tests. So long fly time is a requirement. So some kind of mapping or survey drone is probably going to be the best solution here. Something that take a payload. One idea I was having with Gurney, who had a really cool idea this morning when I woke up. He was talking about flying a drone with some kind of computer on board set up to attack systems, not systems on the drone, but systems elsewhere. So maybe we could set up our own Wi-Fi network in a remote location, fly a drone over it, and then say hack the Wi-Fi, or find some way into that system that will be in the middle of a field somewhere, representing a business or whatever. So that would be a really cool idea. We might get you guys to get involved in that. We might fly the drone and then give you control of the computers on board, and see if you can hack the system we've built on the ground using the computers on board. And I'm wondering if we do that, if that would be a world first. Who knows? Another requirement is, obviously we're going to be changing a lot. We're going to be trying new things. We're going to be trying things, failing, tweaking, replacing. So, it's got to be modular. It's got to be configurable. I've got to have lots of space to work on inside. I've got to be able to have different wiring combinations, I guess, different battery combinations for different requirements, all within something that can fly a long time and carry a big payload. And also, this isn't a corporate activity here. This is me. This is my own personal money here. So I obviously can't spend $9,000 on a DJI. It's just not going to happen. What would happen is probably the first thing that would happen is I'd be single. Then I'd probably lose a house. It just wouldn't be good, so let's keep things in a sensible price point and not break the bank. So I did a bit of research, and this kept on coming up. This is a fixed wing mapping UAV. Comes from China. So you buy it on Banggood or something like that, or AliExpress. And it's a particularly impressive airframe. So it's a twin electric motor with a nearly 2 meter wingspan. So 2 meters, probably about 7 foot or so. So this is no small thing. And the fuselage is over 1 meter long, with a maximum takeoff weight of about 5.5 kilograms. And going off the builds of a lot of people, once you've got the battery on board and all the motors and everything, the whole thing weighs about 3 kilos. So it gives you a payload of about 2.5 kilos, which is quite good actually. So it gives you a lot of options to what to put on board. And as you can see, it's got this little hole in the bottom, which is where the mapping camera would sit inside. Excuse me. It does have a recommended cruising speed of 20 meters per second. And it does say not to go below 10, it will stall. My guess is that if it's fully loaded at 5.5 kilos at 10 meters per second, it's probably already stalled and in a dive. but we'll see as well. What I would like to do if I do get a fixed wing drone is over time I'd like to take my own data and create my own perf results, so I could know, given given a certain payload, what my takeoff speeds and everything else should be. So and this one's made of EPO, which is a type of expanded polystyrene, which is pretty strong, but extremely lightweight. So pros and cons of this one. It's got a huge payload bay. It is absolutely massive inside. It's easy to fly, going off what everybody says. It's got great reviews online, and there's a forum thread on RC forums, RC groups. I'll put the link in the description. And they've basically got a bit of thread on building and flying these aircraft. So there's going to be a lot of help and tips on that thread that I'm going to be able to use. So I won't be going into it completely blind. Like I said, I've never done this before, so this is new to me, and I need to bear that in mind in my choices. It's also relatively cheap. Right now, it's going on Banggood for about 150 quid, but it is on sale. So normally it's around the 180, 200 pound mark. And I have seen it higher than that. It just fluctuates over time. But 150 quid for an airframe. Okay, there's no motors, there's no electronics involved, but that's pretty cheap. I'm not sure if I could, I could get some polystyrene and, and whittle my own plane that's anywhere near as half as good as that one for 150 quid. That's pretty cheap. And by all accounts, it's highly configurable. People have done some tweaks to it, but everyone's done their internals a little bit differently. Some people have used small batteries. Some people have put on massive batteries and gotten, incredible flight times out of it. Typically, they're seeing, from a 6S 4P battery, they're getting about 1.5 to 2 hours flight time out of it. But some people are putting 6S 12Ps in there, which reduces the amount of payload you can carry, but that means they can fly for about 4 hours, which is incredible. So on the negative side, because it's coming from China, it's going to take a while to get here. And also, this is not derogatory. This is just, experience here is not everything that comes directly from China is of good build quality. And there's probably a little bit of it's probably a little bit unfair there. They started off a few years ago not being that great, and actually over time there has been improvements, but I still don't see them at 100%. So it is a bit of a gamble. It is cheap, but it is a bit of a gamble in terms of build quality you're going to get at the final thing. And like I said, this is my first ever build of an aircraft. This does have to be built. I can't just bring, it doesn't just arrive out the box ready to fly. I've got to build this thing, and I've never done that before. So, that's got to be factored in. I'm quite handy. I do quite a bit of what we call DIY here in the UK. And I'm quite handy with the electronics, but still, I've never done it before. One thing to note with this thing is it doesn't have undercarriage, so it's a hand catapult launch, and it's a belly or a parachute landing. So there's a little hatch on the bottom, which can be released with a servo, and a parachute comes out, and it will land supposedly gracefully. And I've seen videos of it working, and actually it does seem to work pretty well. People can catch it before it hits the ground, so it's not coming down super fast. Like I said, it's, maximum takeoff weight is 5.5 kilos. With say a 26-inch parachute, that's going to come down pretty smoothly. So there's all sorts of ideas there of what we can do with it. The same guys also make this one, which is more akin to those ones we saw in the from the likes of DHL and Skyports, where it's a VTOL fixed wing mapping UAV. And this has, instead of twin motors, it's obviously a quad. So it takes off and lands like a quadcopter, and then the propellers transition and the plane then becomes fixed wing. So you get the range, but you also get the convenience and I suppose relative safety of a VTOL solution. Now, this does make it a little bit bigger. It's got a higher maximum takeoff weight as a result, because it does get more grunt from those 4 motors as opposed to 2. But there are certain other trade-offs as well. So it's still got a huge payload bay. It's still apparently very easy to fly. It's got the VTOL. I say relatively cheap. Actually, that one was about £500 or £600 as opposed to the 150, 200 of the other one. But it is highly configurable. The cons were not just the delivery time, but the fact that the only place this is available is a website that's fully in Chinese. Now, I don't speak Chinese, even after several pints of beer. And there would be a very low level of confidence in my ability to fully understand the website and the process and everything that's going on if it was all in Chinese. Now, I've got Google Translate, of course, but, any kind of mistake could really result in a loss of money here. And also because it's quadcopter, it's got 4 motors, you've got a shorter flying time because you're burning more electricity with those motors. And this is a new aircraft, so whereas the Believer is several years old, and I believe that the one right now is actually officially V2 with some improvements on it. This is the first version of the VTOL one, so again, that lack of confidence over build quality kind of creeps into your mind. And the VTOL increases the complexity for my first ever build. There's no build log of one of these, so I would be going into it completely blind and not quite happy with that. So I decided to stick with the Believer, and the reason for that is obviously the confidence we're getting from the RC forum thread and the reports, with those detailed building and fly reviews with lots of ideas of different things that have been tried as well. So it's going to cut a lot of time down for me. It's going to make the build a lot easier, and it's going to give me a lot more confidence in building and flying this machine going forward. I've also ordered some components. So I've decided to start off with the Pixhawk 2.4.8 flight controller, but everything else is what's recommended. So these are the components that they recommend for the Believer, which is the ES3054 Emax servos, a KV900 2418 motor, and 40 amp ESCs to control the power to the motor. For telematics, I've gone for 433 100 milliwatts. Sorry. The reason being is I'm in the UK. If I was in the US, I'd have gone for 915. For those who don't know, my plan is to move to Chicago next year. So when that happens, I can just switch out the telematics module for a 915 megahertz one. So I'm not worried about the frequency, but I've got to go with what's legal here in the UK, and 433 is definitely legal here. Now, in terms of payload, I haven't decided yet. I'm going to build the aircraft, get it going, and then we're going to think about payload. We might start off with a camera and then progress up to maybe a few Raspberry Pis running with Kali, and some Wi-Fi breakout boards and things like that. We might go and do some playing around with, but for now, that's what we're going to do. I suppose it's not going to come as much as a surprise. The next episode is going to be building, and yes, it's actually already here. So I have been building it. It's been interesting, but I haven't quite finished the editing yet. So I've been building it here in my office stroke spare bedroom, and those are going to be the next episode, or potentially 2 episodes, depending on how long the final cut is. but that's what's going to happen. So tune in for the next one, guys. That's it for the first episode. We're going to switch back to the Discord channel. I'm going to be there with a beer or two, answering your questions and getting your feedback. I want to hear your ideas. I want to hear your questions. Give me your feedback on where you want this to go. You know, like I said, this is not me. This is not my journey. This is our journey, and for that to happen, I need your input. So please join me in the Discord channel, and let's go find out more about drones. It's going to be cool, guys. I'm really excited. Right. Okay. This child is signing off. Take care.